Are black Americans and the so-called FBA, are they really tethered to America? Is the real tether white America? So black America, right? Or black Americans, right? Tethered? Are black Americans really, is the real tether white America, right? Is that the real tether right here, white America? All right, so this is our subject. This is Ras Iodonis Tafara, LOJ, line of Tribe of Judah Society, His Majesty, right here. Black American, let me acknowledge that for the record right there. My roots, say Geechee Gullah, right? And, the so-called Creole, New Orleans, the mother and father side respectively right here, just to give some of my bona fides, right? My bona fides here, right? But of course, right here, I, yeah, Rastafari, right? If you only knew the Rastafari movement, right, here in the West began actually in America before the seeds, right, went to Jamaica and grew. Right, so let's note that right there for the record. Check out our other videos on that. But here, this is speaking about the real tether, right? Because this term has been circulating all over social media, right? And this is something very popular in social media. Sometimes I speak to people off of social media, right? And a lot of ones don't know about it, but there are ripple waves in effect, right, that actually go out there, right? But the real movement, some say Claude Anderson started the movement. I like some of his kind of ideas on business economics and looking at black people, and projecting, possibilities and offering certain solutions. But the FBA movement, Foundational Black American Movement, along with like the ABOs, the Aboriginal movements, we regard these as like later day COINTELPRO. A lot of people say that COINTELPRO is just J. Edgar Hoover back in the like the 60s and stuff like that. But actually, if you understand, right, what COINTELPRO stands for is counterintelligence, right? And there's a big counterintel. Many of our people are looking at, our brothers and sisters, from the Caribbean, right, as tethers, or from South America, or our brothers and sisters, from so-called Africa as tethers. I'm going to confine this right here to we people over here in the Americas and the Caribbean for this 400 years. And I always use this expression, right? The fellow, Chaverim and Talmudim, the fellow brothers, associates, and disciples, you'll know this, right? Americas and Caribbean. When I say Americas, not just America, but Americas, right? North America, South America, and the Caribbean, right? There's a very intimate relationship historically between our peoples. Now, we live in these latter days and times, and yes, things have changed because the whole world, has changed, right? And it seems as though, black people have been in a state of inertia, right? Especially since like the whole civil rights movement, affirmative action, and integration, right? And that has done more damage than good. So here I like to share the words of my godfather, right? The King of Kings of Ethiopia, Kedemah Haile Selassie, who says, these young people face a world beset with the most effectively organized program of deceptive propaganda and of thinly screened operations ever known. The words here of Kedemah Haile Selassie, King of Kings of Ethiopia. Give thanks, give thanks. All right? So we begin this off right here about Black America. Now, a few ones know we've been having this discussion, and we touched on it briefly on the podcast, but definitely when we get a panel together and we can go into a little more detail on this right here concerning FBA, Black American, right, and FBA, right? Tethered by white America, right? Who is the real tether, right? What is the tether, right? Now, for ones that are not aware of what we mean by this expression, let's actually give some examples. Now, check this out right here. Some exhibits right here. Bro is saying black people were not brought to America on ships. Do we have a live track? It's Is there a laugh track where people are laughing at first and then it kind of goes to like crying, tears? Maybe we need to like kind of create like a laugh track like that, where it begins off with like laughter, but then the laughter, is turned into tears. But is bro serious right here? So black people weren't brought to America on ships? Is that true? Right? So what were we brought on? Right? Where we're from? Okay. He is saying that there's no evidence of boats. This is like some goofy people be talking about things that happened thousands of years ago, like we're gonna find a whole bunch of evidence laying around. No, I'm serious, for real. I mean, think about it over here, like with gentrification, right? Within some of these neighborhoods that some of us here in the Americas live, right? Where they used to be predominantly black neighborhoods, and the people in the black neighborhoods used to be from the Caribbean, right? Used to be from down south, right? Or other parts of America, and maybe here or there, but that maybe a few from Africa, right? But the Africans kind of have come in more and more. I'm talking about from other parts. The Ethiopians already, here, and already here from even back in the early 1900s. That's a whole other aspect of history right there, right? But here, bro is saying that we don't have no evidence of ships. This is one of the kind of ABOs or the ABOs argument. Now, let me say this right here. That we have known and documented and provable, Blackfoot, Blackfoot native, blood within us, our paternal, what would that be? That would be father, right, mother, grandfather, grandmother. I think not my grandmother, but my great-grandmother, right? My father's mother. Am I saying great-grandmother? Is that correct? Yeah. Well, she's documented Blackfoot, right? Now there is other, bloodlines that do link me, with our people, that were brought over here. But we do have native as well, of course. There is some native, right? But are we going to claim that and then become a denier of the truth, right? So bro is saying that black people were not brought to America, right, on ships from Africa. Yeah, that's what bro man is saying. He's saying there's no evidence of boats. However, black people are the real native Indians, right? So the question is this sudden, right, distancing from what's called the motherland? They're talking about the continent that's called Africa, formerly known as Ethiopia, but a continent known as Africa, right? Is it rooted in colorism? Is colorism worse, right? Is colorism worse than racism? Which one do you think is worse, colorism or racism? Troy Trevane, on one of his live, his podcasts that he do, his presentation, his content, he had a subject matter about which one is worse, where he was asking for his callers and listeners, to chime in on which one is worse. Is it racism? Is racism worse than colorism? See, what's colorism? Well, like black people, we got a lot of issues. Like some white folks might know. Maybe white folks know more than we think. You know what I mean? I would not be surprised, right? But in the black community, there's this whole color thing. Whether you light skin, brown paper bag, all these things that go back to like former times of our ancestors, right? Sometimes going back several generations. It's like there's a popular belief in social media since people are becoming more so-called intellectually stimulated. Some people wasn't this intellectually stimulated, when they went to school. When they was going to school. In school they wasn't that interested in studying these things. But now on social media, like everybody's becoming like a scholar, a super scholar, a researcher, a developer. I'm not saying anything is wrong with that, but sometimes it really doesn't pass, they say pass muster, so to speak. You know, I remember some of our people say, well, I ain't black. I remember my Nana and others, but she even had a firmer reasoning that wasn't rooted, you know, in the hate that hate produced. You see what I'm saying? So now this brother here, this is a meme here, right? This is a meme here. So we want to put some disclaimer, right? Let's put some disclaimer on it. This is a meme right here, right? So here you see copper, like copper pipes, and then you see the copper penny. Notice that they're going to phase out the copper penny. You think that's all because of this? It's a big conspiracy, right? So the brother has some red, some copper reddish brown. I mean, we have this. See, it's white so-called supremacy, racism, white supremacy that what do you call it? That stereotyped our features to make our ancestors, you know, our parents, you know, make them believe, right, that they were like the stereotype. So when you go and look up racist, slavery, stereotype images of black people, you know how they want to draw black people in this cartoon, big lip, buck eyes, and all this kind of goofy stuff, right? And here's the thing, that none of these racist stereotypes that the so-called racist white man of them times had, or even those who might continue it in these times had, really reflects who we are or what we look like, right? And I think black people are going through something right now where, because of social media, we're beginning to look at ourselves and say, wait, you know, I know I'm black, but I never noticed my color. Wow, I like my color. Look at my color. But the colorism now, right? The colorism is like, you know, I've heard from certain, you know, people like of our people, and it's surprising to me, because personally, I don't really see like, oh, I want it to be lighter, I want it to be darker. I was personally happy with my complexion, right? My complexion as is. I didn't have a issue with that. But I do remember growing up, you know, you hear things about one's light, one's dark, and it's kind of interesting if you're from, you know, of my particular generation. Some of y'all might be of that particular generation, you know, whether it's the early 70s, late 60s, that particular time right there. I know I want to say old man, but you better, you know, watch your mouth. Because I hope and pray that most of y'all that would say like, oh man, you'll get to be, you know, older, because interesting things you learn and how you grow, and you get to those moments where you're like, you know, that's precious, right? So we got to have a little bit of grace, you know, with some of the youngins, you know, the YNs and the youngins, you know what I mean, with their new discovery, you know, seeing social media and being able to, you know, learn things, right, and get exposed to things that many never were exposed to. Some of us already were into the books, the studies, you know, research, you know, both for school and even doing more on our own. Some of us did more research, I mean, real research on our own, trying to find out those curiosities before there was social media and before there was internet and before we can Google or AI something. And I'm not dismissing the technology by no means, but I'm just saying, right? Just saying, right? So, bro, what's going on? You know, so we are the real Native Americans. And what you mean there's no proof that our ancestors came over here, right, on ships? So black people were brought over here on ships. Here's what I would say, right? You know, I'll throw a little lifeline right here. That not all of our people came, right? You know, not all of our people came from the same place, right? And I'm not trying to be funny when I'm saying that. We all didn't come from the same place, right? Some majority, according to the available data and information, coming from west, you know, the western part of Africa. You know what I mean? The west, you know, at least this is where the ships and the transport and all that came from, you know, the western port, right? But in our research, we see our people coming from a lot of other points of origin, from Europe even, right? Yes, there were black people up in Europe, you know, and we gotta, you know, we gotta recognize that, you know, we gotta note that not all of our people, and even those who came on the boats and the ships from West Africa, many of them will march across the Sahel from East Africa, from Central Africa, from even parts of Central to South Africa, from all over the place. You know, we've been everywhere, man. Hail up to the Family Assembly, sub-Sahara Israelites. Really hail up to them. You know what I mean? Because they've been doing a very good work. You know, 'cause we've been seeing that, you know, we really got to link with, you know, like-minded, you know, ones who are, you know, co-religionists or co-spiritualists, you know, or who are co-identity, you know, and also embrace us, right, in our, you know, self-defined identity as a people, because every other people, the European defined what he want to be, right, because we're living in his world. He defined this world, right, so to speak. But it's not just that his definition is the only definition, but we have to kind of get from where we're at to get to where we're going. So on this whole tether thing, who is the real tether? Right? Who's the real tether? And what is a tether? Now, tether is a term used by members of the American Negro ethnic group, right? Referred to later in history as colored, right? As now they put African American and black. Actually, we see the identification with us as black, right? And even nationality-wise as Ethiopian, going back to the 1930s. That's another video that we did. If you haven't checked out that video that we did, you know, about, you know, the origin of black, you know, and the term black, please check that one out right there. I think we may have more than one, but the most recent one, right? So you have groups like the FBA, right? So we're not affiliated, you know, with FBA. Yes, many of our people, even in the society, LOJ society, you know, there are those who are Black American and also from the Americas, right? Whether North America, South America. We also have ones from the Caribbean, right? Who are members, you know, of this brotherhood in society known as LOJ. And yes, it can be classified as a Black American, you know, mansion, you know, or a Black American, for lack of a better word, mansion of Rastafari, right? Maybe one of the, I won't say first, because before us it was the Rastafarites, right? There's a Rastafarites, right? Just want to point that out right there. Rastafarites, we touch on them. Check out our vids on the Rastafarites and the origins of the Rastafari, right, movement in the West, the Western Hemisphere. Originated from the East, from light shining from the east to the west, that prophecy of the man-child, that prophecy of the Son of Man. All right? Yes, all right. So, right now when we say that, a lot of ones will say, oh, that's Jamaican, you were Jamaican, yeah, that's Jamaican. See, that's the ignorance. That's the ignorance. You know, even when you provide information, people prefer to stay ignorant because they don't want to go through those stages of grief. You know, the 5 stages of grief, look it up. So we're not affiliated with FBA, right, or the ADOS, or there are some things that they do or have said or may stand for that, you know, are similar, right, or maybe even the same. But overall, we think that these are kind of very destructive, you know, these latter-day movements, and we suspect COINTELPRO, counterintelligence, counter-intel, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of these things are very secular. You know, one thing we notice about our real movements of black people that stood for unity, going back to the Roaring Twenties, you know, to the Rastafarites, or even later after that to what became known as the Garveyites. That's why they say Garveyites, brothers and sisters. They say Garveyites because somehow they already knew about the Rastafarites. So you start saying Garveyites, not to say Rastafarites, and then abbreviate it to Rasta. So we're saying that the Rastafari movement here in the West began in Chicago and New York and other areas. And that became a catalyst, you know, for the Garveyite movement, what later on become known as the Garveyite movement, and that whole the Africa for the Africans and black people, you know, recognize themselves as black. But it was the Ethiopian World Federation that was one of the first groups of black people, right, that identified us as black. So actually black comes in before African American. That was Jesse Jackson, you know, and you know, condolences and all of that as well, right, to describe African or Caribbean immigrants. So this term tether, we had to give it a little bit of footnote there because ones need to understand these terms, right, in its historical context, right, and to show that ones have done more, than read a meme here or there, but have other information to say, well, yes, this is true because of this, or no, this is not, and this here needs to be checked out, needs to be fact checked, or it's already been fact checked, right, and it's a disrespect because it ain't true. You know what I'm saying? But the term tether is used by certain members of so-called American Negro, right, to describe the so-called Negro. They, in a sense, this generation, I don't know if it's Gen Z or it's Alpha Beta, I'm not too sure, but have gone back. But we have to spare the Alpha Beta, that's so much the younger generation that are coming out from this, because this is very dangerous, and we suspect that this is COINTELPRO. That's why we ask whether the real tether of so-called Black Americans is not our brothers and sisters, right, and our cousins or distant cousins, right, so to speak. Our brothers, some of them are brothers and sisters. Listen, I got cousins up here and they're Black Americans, so why wouldn't I have cousins, from the Caribbean? Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't we? See, and this really shows a great ignorance, right? A great ignorance, and ignorance, the original sin is really ignorance, if you think about it. You know what I mean? That's what led one to do against what they was commanded not to do, right? So this term tether is used to describe often Africans, talking about different ethnicities, nationalities that people generally call Africans, or Black people from the Caribbean, right? Immigrants who moved to America, right, primarily for economic opportunity, right, using the benefits of the American Negro civil rights struggle, while simultaneously disparaging the history, legacy, and lineage of the Negro American movement. Now, it's kind of interesting that ones have gone back to this Negro thing, this Negro shit. Isn't it interesting? I mean, yes, we do use it as a point of reference, but it's like moving forward, they've gone backward. Are you following what I'm saying about the COINTELPRO? People think the COINTELPRO was limited to J. Edgar Hoover or J. Edgar Hoover. It was not, right? One would say, well, it was disbanded. Well, yes, it was disbanded as that particular project, right? But the name is a strategy. The name was COINTELPRO, counterintelligence. So having Black people here in this 21st century wanting to go back to being called Negro, when we know that comes from the Latin, right, and basically means black, it's the craziest thing, right? So when they talk about cognitive dissonance, right, or one talk about people learning, disabilities, yeah, I mean, this is real serious, or even maybe having mental, psychological health disorders, right? Be that as it may, right, there's something true about this. Not the tether part, but this is how tether is used, right, by them, right? So tether has been used to describe them, but then when we really study our history as Black people in America, right, there was Africans that was brought over, even if it was brought over in some sense of servitude or slavery, right, from the Caribbean, right, the white so-called slave masters, they often, right, sometimes exchange, right, certain so-called slaves, Black enslaved persons from here with other Black enslaved persons in the Caribbean, right? They shipped us around like cargo, right? Even from some of the history, it sounded like the wildest thing, but there's a lot of truth to it. Even shipping us to Africa and back from Africa, all over the place. Because we were used, our ancestors was used as, imagine, having Black people that they can just work, right, and use here, use there. Oh, I need some people to do such and such. I don't have enough slaves, right? So I have somebody I know up in the States, right, up in America, right, and he got a big plantation, and I need some bucks. I need some niggas, and so he's gonna send them to me, right? And then in the process of time, man might meet with a woman, and get an opportunity, and there's a child born. So what is that child? That child is one of our people, plain and simple, right? That child is our people, right? No tether, running no wire fence. That child is one of ours, right? It's one of us. So how have they managed to do that? Because, people talk about Francis Cress Welsing, and you know, the ISIS papers, the key to the colors, you know what I mean? And all that good and accurate and true information, and they fall down to say these sort of things. Now we're dividing and conquering ourselves, right? Because they recognize that the so-called black population, as we said, right, is becoming more so, is continuing to grow, even though we're under severe attacks, planned genocide, and the so-called Planned Parenthood and these other schemes and strategies, and a lot of the social policies, that have incubated like a disease, right, over generations, and where we're at presently in the 21st century, right, dealing with so much brokenness. Now, there's ones that say, well, these Africans and these Caribbean, they're black people, yes, but they come over here and they separate themselves, and they're only looking out for their own economic opportunity, while simultaneously disparaging the history, legacy, and lineage of the Negro American. Let me tell you something. I don't know if this is something that some of the intelligentsia, it's almost like some of these kind of like, and we went to college, we was college educated, so to speak. We was college educated, or we took education in college, but this seems to be like something that they work up on campuses. And now, because of social media, they can do social media experiments. A lot of these are experiments that are going very, very bad. Because black Americans, how many of us and our ancestors especially have done things that have moved? Black people who are in America have moved from one part of America to the next part of America for economic opportunity. We have done this ever since 1865, and maybe a little bit before, but especially since 1865. Those are our people who left the southern slave states and moved out to Kansas, because back in the days, Kansas was seen to be like a promised land. What about that right there, right? We moved around for economics. We have people that have come from the South, down south, right? Whether North Carolina, South Carolina, whether Georgia, you know what I mean? Have come from down there, moving up to New York, or moving to Chicago, or moving to one of the biggest cities of New York for economic opportunities as well. And they took advantage, some of them, right, of using, right, the American Negro civil rights struggle. Right? People say, well, oh, you're saying it's all right? No, you see, what has happened is that we have failed. I'm saying we, and going back to our ancestors who failed, up to us who are not doing this, therefore we are still failing, right, to educate our people on using these things. Now, a lot of these things, it's very difficult to use because not everybody's using it, right? And while at the same time not pointing out how other immigrant groups that are clearly, many of them are clearly, how can I say, racist. Now, we have these cultural things, Yankee, Yardie, so what, getting your feelings, but we're the black people that talk about playing the dozens. I don't know if ones know about the playing the dozens, right? Something that we do, where we rank and we diss. You have to have tough skin, right? What happened to that? What about that? People talk, sticks and stones may break my bones, but what about say words will never harm me? But I know. We're of a different generation, right? So it's also how these babies have been raised, right? To have not just thin skin, you know what I'm saying? But also thin on the membrane, of thought, right? And really deeply thinking that many of our own black American people have disparaged our own movements, right? And we know about it if you really know about it. And I'm not saying disparage, but we may have differences of opinion. Somebody may have an opinion. We have people in our family that have all sort of opinions, and whenever we get together or have gotten together, we're like, oh, here's so-and-so. I'm like one who's at some family, they know that, well, they know what I'm about. You know what I'm saying? Some agree, some might have disagreements, right? And we have maybe heated discussions. But isn't that what family does? Isn't that what family does? Right? Let's have that discussion. Right? And let's not have such thin skin. Right? Right? But then when we look at these things like FBA and Tariq Nasheed, the same one who did the Hidden Colors and seemed to be speaking about black unity. And now he's doing this, and it's like disunity. Oh, we have to delineate. We have to delineate. Nigga, we don't have to delineate. We already delineate. We gotta have unity among ourselves, and not by having disunity among our brothers, those who are related, or looking at a hairline. Oh, look, you have a hairline. That means, this is like such nonsensical. You know what I mean? And there's a backlash. You see, the seed that's being sowed today, right? If it continues to grow like weeds, it's going to have some irreversible consequences in the future, right? Now, what those consequences will be, right? It may not even be us that will be the ones to so-called just see it or have to deal with it, right? But it's our children, it's the grandchildren, and you know what I'm saying? It's just like our ancestors made decisions, right, that we were born into, right? And when we really begin to acknowledge, like, man, it's almost like, we have to really, charity begins at home, and also responsibility also would begin at home, where we have to look at what our people did or had not done, right? Now, look at this one right here. This is from Crispus Attucks Reloaded. All right. Yeah, that's cute. We're going back to that history there, right? Hopefully we don't get stuck back there. Because we get stuck back there, we're going to lose all the progress that our people struggled to make and were able to make to this point in time, right? But I don't know why Kuku Kufu, is on the news saying African Americans don't need reparations. Notice the reparation wasn't even spelled correctly. You see what I'm saying? It's those basics of education. That's that love, right? When we can correct one another and we can receive correction, right? Because this is where the baton, black people, our ancestors dropped the baton, right? That's what really happened, right? And we're blaming other groups of people, right? In even really worse conditions than us, right? For taking advantage of certain economic opportunities, not just the economic opportunities, our other people's work on a level of collectivism, right? For how many decades have black people in America, from the good old civil rights and, what seemed like black unity, got into the gang, bang, 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 and you're not from my area code, right? So you better not come around and eat. What the hell? You see what I'm saying? How did that happen? Oh, that was a white man. Really? Right? Well, the drugs came in, right? We didn't bring in the drugs, right? But then we sell it to our own people. I mean, come on now. People say, well, we had to make a bag. So that means that the drugs, I'm talking about among black America, yes, we know that the government, the CIA, all these things have been proven, right? And it's been proven longer than people think. People think it's proven because they see it in social media. Before social media, a lot of us already knew that this was the case, and we did our best before social media to get the word out. Now people are getting the word on social media, right? It wasn't us that brought the drugs in. They brought the drugs in because you're tethered, right? Because you're tethered, right? Because black people are tethered to white America. That's the real tether there, right? So we're talking about Africans, and we're talking about people from the Caribbean coming over, and they're not black Americans. So if you want to say they're the tether, okay, I'll go with you on that. Let's go with you. So that means these other communities that come into our neighborhood. What about the Asian communities, right? What about the so-called Arab, the Mohammedan communities? What about them, right? That come into our neighborhoods, right? And they come out and they would set up shops, stores, become rich, so forth and so on. And you know what? Even the Chinese restaurants that have proliferated in our neighborhoods, right? We're talking about so-called black neighborhoods. I'm not saying communities. We don't have community, but we do have neighborhoods, right? Our neighborhoods, right, going back maybe to 30, 40 or more years. Well, let's see. Yeah, 20, 40. Yeah, 40 to 50 years, man. Right? Have been, you know that most of the Chinese restaurants, they also take advantage, right, of the African so-called, the American, Negro civil rights, the legislation that come in. You didn't know that when the civil rights in 1965, when that thing was signed, you didn't know that it allowed for them to bring in other groups, open the doors. So we thought now we're going to have an equal share for the pie, and the white men open the doors to a bunch of other different groups that many of them are very antagonistic, and they're the real haters of us, and they're the ones who really economically undermine us, right, and have no historical, familial relationship to us as black people, right? We and our people in the Caribbean, right, and in the Americas, like South America, here in North America, have more in common as black, right, peoples, right, than these other groups. But you don't hear them talking about the other groups, right? Why? Because they admire the other groups, because other groups got money and they're on a colorism tip, right? See, so colorism is worse than racism, right? Still to this day, in social media, one like Tariq Nasheed, right? He went after that one Tommy Sotomayor. Now, you might not like Tommy Sotomayor, his opinions, whatever, but really, you're going to co-sign calling a black man crispy, right? Making dolls, making fun of a black man with dark complexion, right? Because you want to say, well, he is not FBA, right? But you're still talking about a dark-skinned black person, and other black people who are dark-skinned, they don't know that that sword of crispy can turn on them. But you know what happens a lot of times? People will laugh at the one being joked on, right? Or you know what I mean? They'll laugh at that one because they're hoping that nobody turns their attention to them. That's what people do, right? Right? That's exactly what people do. But hear this here, right? Don't know why Kuku Kufi, right? Kuku Kufi is on the news saying African Americans don't need reparations. She is a whole tether. So that's an example of how tether is used. It's a whole tether. Why are they even in the conversation? Wow. Why do they keep saying we? Right? Yo, that's a whole first generation immigrant. Right? Now, there's a point if we, right, as black American people are speaking about that, then we need to say, well, we as black American people, right? And just define what we're talking about. Right? And the individuals or groups that speak against it, we politely say, hey, this is a conversation. It's like reparations is going on, right, in the CARICOM and Caribbean communities, right? I don't know if black Americans know about it, but notice what we do? We keep out of that business. But this idea of a tether, I think that's the wrong idea. I would say he or she is a whole fool, right? Right? And if they're from Africa, right, then of course, right, they just need to shut the STFU, right? Just keep it a buck, right? We don't need to create other terminologies and ideologies, right, that actually do more in undermining, right, the big cause, right? It's like a little joke, right? A little joke may be serious. Has anyone, right, referred to you as a tether to your face? Imagine somebody coming to you and say, yo, you a tether. Tether to what? Right? Tether to what? Right? Has anyone ever referred to you as a tether to your face? You a tether. Right? Right over here. This is something called West Indian Americans. Now, they choose to call themselves West Indian. Hey, listen. What do we want? You want to call yourself foundational? I'm still wondering, like, why you do that. Right? This is things I saw, right? Black Americans easily move. So I'm 100 with the black Americans. Don't add the F you. Don't F we, right? F you. Don't bring that around here. That's some goofy stuff, right? And that ain't going nowhere. That ain't going nowhere. It's probably going to be a lot of people very soon, right? Once they grow up a little bit more and have to deal with real life, that's going to be talking about, man, I've been wasting my time with this shit. You know what I'm saying? You know, because black people have a whole issue. We got a whole issue among ourselves. And the best way we can kind of like, you know, generate that unity is not going after other communities that we might be jealous of, right? You know, and yeah, black people, you know, come on, we have that jealousy. We have that, one might not want to call it, we can't be racist. Because racist mean we have to have the means of power. One thing to understand the context of what she was saying, right? Okay, let's say we're not racist in that racist sense. But if you tether to the white man, then you can be a racist, right? Because you Massa, we sick? Massa, we sick? Can you imagine that? Massa, we sick? Right? I have nothing against one saying, listen, STFU, this is not your conversation, right? You know, just like if my friend, right, who is a black American, I'm in a store and I'm arguing because they owe me something, and my friend come along and say, it's okay. No. You keep out of it. Am I going to call my friend a tether? Right? You know, he might be tethered to me. He might be thinking that he's doing me a good turn. But I say, listen, let me handle this. This is my business, right? This is how we need to, you know, address these other groups, so forth and so on. You know, let them wild out, you know, and then we show their, you know, we show their bad behavior. Well, you know, but we should not be the perpetrators of it, right? Because black Americans in particular, we have a particular strength, but even in having strengths, we have weaknesses, right? If we don't want to talk to ourselves about these weaknesses, black men and black people, black Americans are more tethered, right? Are more tethered. I was asking myself, are black people in America more tethered to the white man, the Trumps and the white man? And I think some things in Trump can be beneficial if we are wise. But it's the immature amongst us that ain't going to get it. And we think we're going to make the immature mature. Come on now. Right? It's like in school. You're going to make your friend who has no interest in studying and learning, you're going to make him, you know, academic and a scholar and get him into his books. No. You probably have to encourage him. If you don't want to come to class, encourage him in flunking off. You know what I mean? Get lost, because otherwise he's going to distract you, right, from what you got to do, right? Check this out. I'm going to prove my point about black America, right? Black America, FBA, is tethered to America. Think about this for a moment, right? We know how America was founded. Yeah, we've done a lot of things. Our ancestors, rather, have done a lot of things, right? Good, right, and bad, and some things ugly. But on the scale of what we're talking about, have done a lot of things that have been beneficial, highly beneficial to America and to the world, right? We need to focus there, right? It's like black people, you know, it's like we have like attention deficit disorder, right? You know, instead of filling the social media with our accomplishments, right? And also not just historically, but also seeking to do accomplishments that can inspire our people, you know. Instead, we're off dividing and conquering. That's a whole COINTELPRO, right? This whole FBA thing is a whole COINTELPRO. It's a whole counterintelligence thing, right? And basically lead nowhere, especially when you have leaders that don't want to say they're leaders. You know, that's the wackest thing. We're not leaders, you know, we're not leaders, but you are the leader. Everybody listen to you. You say tether, they all say tether. Where tether come from, right? So his idiotic mistake, people keep repeating and try to justify while they try to run away from the fact that they are tethered. You know what I mean? For example, a CI, a confidential informant, a confidential informant is tethered to the one that is their handler. You know that, right? So somebody who's a confidential informant, they are tethered to their handler. Now I'm saying that because we're talking about the FBA thing, right? The FBA movement, right? Because we got to talk about this. I know some of y'all like the macking, right? But don't get macked. You know, you get macked, you know, have a dude treat you like a hoe, right? Have a dude treat a whole people like a hoe, right? Don't want black people or FBA to wake up and say, man, we've been pimped out. We've been macked out, right? We've been black exploited. Black exploited. Don't be black exploited, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to black explain it again, right? The history of black Americans. Notice how they put black in lowercase anyways. is an indispensable chapter in our grand American story. Oh, look, President Donald J. Trump said this, Black History Month, 2026. Okay, okay. So the history of Black Americans is an indispensable chapter. It's just a chapter? You know what I mean? Ones don't even see the sneak this. It's a chapter. Really? So the Grand American Storybook only has one chapter. What are we, in the Smithsonian? You know, what are we, a stuffed animal? Are you following where I'm going with this, right? Right? So a lot of people think like, yes, look, Trump recognized every president, almost every has said some things, you know, as a president, because that's just the president sort of thing to do, right? But one will say, hey, I'm all with Trump, right? Now, I'm not one who's particularly, you know, against Trump. Trump is just another, like a piece on the chessboard, right? See, that's how we have to understand this game here, right? That's how many of our ancestors were able to understand that, right? They played one pawn, one piece against the next piece to eke out the little bit, right, of forward movement and progress that we as Black people can say that we really sincerely, duly, and truly made here in these United States of America, right? But notice what they're saying here. They're saying Black history is American history. For real? For real? So that means before America, we didn't have no history? I don't think you get that. They're saying Black history is American history. Can you see the tethering? So Black people, right, who was brought over here, let me go with the Abos for a moment. Okay, let's say some of y'all and some of us are Aboriginal, right? And let's say some were brought over, right? Right? Because where's the ships? What do you think the ships are going to be in the museum or something like that? Come on, right? It's like, you ever commit a crime? You ever keep the things that you committed the crime with? Right? If you do have them, you'll hide them or disguise them. You're not going to put it out in the open because somebody say, oh, this is a crime. This is the gun that you used to do those murders. You know what's going to happen? They're going to take that gun and they're going to, you know what I mean? So, you know, talking about the ships, whatever. But let's deal with the tethering. How Black Americans, right, and FBA, right, in reality and truth is tethered, right, to white America, right, and this so-called white American history. I'm showing you this right here, what you're seeing right there. It says Black history is American history. Really? Trump said that Black, you know, American, right? What did Trump say? Let's get what Trump said. He said the history of Black Americans is an indispensable chapter. He only puts us down as a chapter. We only are a chapter. Can you imagine? It's like a chapter. Right? Wow. We're just a chapter in our grand. So he makes that distinction right there. Right? But so history of Black Americans. Right? Let's go over here. Right? But notice, it don't say Black American history. You notice that there? You notice that, right? It didn't say Black American. Who puts these things together, right? It don't say Black American history is American history, right? That makes a little sense because we're talking about Blacks who are American, right? Or Blacks here in America, right? You know? Erasing Black history means erasing American history? Wow. Babylon is desperate to survive, right? You know, this fallen empire is fallen, is desperate. You see what they're saying in this? It says erasing Black history. Wait, if Black identifies us in a political term as a people, right? That means that before the so-called slave ships and after slave ships, so we had a history before and we have a history after, right? And so they're telling us that we didn't have no history afterward. Don't you understand the COINTELPRO that's going on? This is the tethering of Black Americans, right? That's why even online you see that the FBA seem to have a lot of support, right? Because it appeals, right, to your subjective feelings and emotion, right? And it appeals to certain subjective trauma you may have had, right? You know, like I might meet another Black American and we have an argument. Do I say, man, all Black Americans are like such and such? Because I'm a Black American too. I probably won't say that. I probably would say this individual guy, whoever they is, such and such and such, right? I would deal with him personally. So if I have an encounter, right, with a, Jamaican, I had encountered some Jamaican Rastas, that was goofballs. They were off. They were talking about this and that. And I'm like, you don't know me, homie, right? Because they're talking like some things, because they don't know Geechee Gullah history. Right? That's why when any Jamaican or whatnot hears some real Geechee Gullah speak, they're gonna think like, well, hold on for a moment. Or someone from the Caribbean, they're gonna think, wait, that sounds a lot like what, patois? Right? Does that tell you anything? Right? Does that tell you anything? Right? See, that's the untethered part of our Black American so-called history, right? But they say erasing Black history means erasing American history. For real? For real? You see? So once again, we got what they call it, like a Stockholm syndrome, right? Look at this one here. This one here says that Black history is American history. Really? So we talk about, Black history, and we talk about ancient times, or the things that occurred in West Africa, going all the way back to East Africa, going back to the Levant even, right? You mean that's also is American history? No, it's not. Right? Why can't they say that Black history is history? That make a better meaning. Wouldn't that make a better meaning, y'all? Right? Black history is, right? Is history. Is real history. We should do that, right? Black history is history, real history. Somebody, if you'll make a meme, just share it with us. RastafariJews@gmail.com. Yeah? Right? How about this one right here? Now here they really go, man, they go tricky here. Look how they use the colors. Look how they use the colors and flip the script. So we tell you about Black, Ethiopian World Federation, the Ethiopian connection, but you think any of them want to talk about that, right? That's the big picture. That's what frees us, right? That's the part of our story that frees us. So when we tell you about the origin of the term Black, the Ethiopian World Federation Incorporated, you know what I mean? What was going on with the Rastafarites of Chicago, those other movements, that became the seed, right, of the Garveyite, the Back to Africa, the Garveyite, and also other progressive movements coming straight through all those decades until we get to like the 60s, and then when things really fell apart, right, actually was the very thing that we were looking for, how it was a political cloak and dagger that happened, right? The Civil Rights Bill 1965, it opened the doors to a lot of communities that FBA won't dare call them tethers. They come right into our neighborhood, right? Somebody like the Asian, Chinese food, the Asian, right? And they have come under, right, the same American Negro Civil Rights Act. Because as a footnote, like when they say read the fine print, if you read the fine print, but this is slick here. They say Black history is America's history. We won't let it be erased. Who's the we? Who's talking right here? As Trump administration works to erase. Now this one here says that the Trump administration is working to erase Black history. Now the other meme we just showed you that must came out from the Trump administration is saying that the Black American, is an indispensable chapter. Like our history is just a chapter, right? But a chapter that if you know what's going on, it seems like he's working and his administration working to erase, right? We must fight to preserve it. Here are some ways to do that this year. So there's a lot of movements here, right? This is from the good, the good news, the good. Interesting that they use those colors, right? Remember I'm telling you about how our Black, story here in America, the children of the Ethiopians and the children of Israel, Amos 9 and 7, is all connected. Look at the colors they're using, right? Look at the order of the colors, right? Black immigrants and American story. And you see, Black immigrants, before we had the plethora of immigrants from the Caribbean or even from, there was always a back and forth. That's what a lot of people don't want to recognize, right? Because the slave masters here in the Americas and the slave masters in the Caribbean and the route of the slave ships, they caused, right, cooperation, right, between the two. They were cooperating, between the two. So sometimes slaves were sent from America to the Caribbean and from Caribbean to America. They haven't told you that part of it, have they? Black immigrants often come to U.S. seeking the advancement of higher education to escape poverty. Do you know why? Right? Because the example that many of our forward-thinking ancestors, right, showed and proved, right? Our movements here to liberate ourselves in America, right, and to do that which, right, is right, plus the civil rights movement, it had a good, that's a whole reasoning there, right there. You know what I mean? It was necessary, but it's like the Native American says, pale face, the pale face or the pale man, pale face. They just call the white man the pale face. He speak with forked tongue, right? White man speak with forked tongue, right? And how many times did the white man make treaties with the native peoples, and how many times did they break it? You understand what I'm saying? So even when black people got the civil rights, right, legislation 65, many of them didn't really pay attention to the fine print. I mean, it was a victory. There was a lot of effort there. Sometimes people say, just take the W, just take the win, right? But in that win came a great sin, right, to black people. You know what I mean? A great lack. This is why this generation, the youths look around and say, how could we get from that to this, right? And they're really wondering, and many of these intellectuals, scholars, researchers, content creators don't really want to say the truth because they know that some of their big platforms, because basically what they're doing is they're giving you information to make money, right? We already know on our platform, at this point, we are free because we don't have a whole lot of ones that be checking out our videos. We get, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's good because at least the ones who do engage actually do engage with the content right here, right? And some also share it on other platforms, so hopefully others get to see it. But there's these ones that have these big, big platforms, you know what I mean, that have thousands times more views and 1,000 times more, subscribers, right? That they're indebted to do this Step and Fetch It show. They're doing like a Step and Fetch It. They may be blackface, but they're doing a Step and Fetch It, right? That's what a lot of this FBA is too, a Step and Fetch It. It's genius COINTELPRO because there's many black people who are tethered to white America, and they are really tethered to white people. You know what I'm saying? In the same way that in the Caribbean, when we talk about, there's many ones under the British. Like at least the Caribbean community, right? Many ones understand historically that there was those who were under the British, right? And benefited by reinforcing British philosophy and policies, right? You know what I mean? So they became that buffer zone, right? For Britain, to kind of dominate Jamaica and the Caribbean. In the same way, the white man has these same ones in our own black communities, right? And now with social media, right? These people can be like, kind of like, you'll never know on the surface, but they say the tree is known by its fruit, right? The tree is known by its fruit. So black immigrants often come to the U.S. seeking the advancement of higher education and to escape poverty. Now, I want to say, well, yeah, they come over here because they're trying to do what we do. They're trying to be like us. I don't know when our people fell to such, how can I say, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? On that particular level. You know what I mean? And to escape poverty. Now, yeah, maybe some of these groups, when they come over here, right, they only come from Africa, right? They come from the African or the black diaspora, including the Caribbean. Maybe some come from South America. You see what it says? Some come from Central America. And maybe some of them have issues with black Americans. Maybe some of them say shit that we don't like, right? Sticks and stones, brothers. I mean, no, for real. Stick and stones on that, right? We should allow that to create an incentive to us. Well, they don't do it for us because the law is. Wait. So you mean the white man is involved in it, and you still are gonna call your own brothers and sisters? Oh, they're not my brothers and sisters because I'm just American. Well, you are tethered, right? You are tethered, right? We had a history, right, before America, And we say, well, we don't know because, well, we can search it out. We can seek it out. We don't have to just be all tethered, right, to America. So I'm just seeking to prove the point that black Americans, not all, but this whole FBA thing, are tethered to white America, right? You know, I mean, and how can we escape that on a level? But the problem is not whether we are as black people here in these here United States of America or are not. The question is, why don't these FBAs speak about that? Because if you notice that, it's like America is the end all and be all, right? Now, let's back up for a moment. Our people were forced and enslaved to come over here from the most ancient time, 400 plus years ago, right? We were whipped, brutalized, raped, all kind of things happened to our ancestors and our people, right? And through struggle and fight, we get to this particular point in time, you know what I mean, that we are at this present time. And you mean, with all of that, we're going to still have some allegiance, right, to those who have harmed us and to their system of things, and then we're going to reject our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean? If anything, we need to school them. I mean, use the same social media to school ones, right? Basically, school ones, right? And to bust them down from their tethering. Now, the Caribbean, ones in the Caribbean, they have their own tethering, right? Many ones in the British West Indies, they're tethered to the American. I mean, they're tethered to the British. So they're tethered to the British. I was thinking about those under some of the, like, U.S. Virgin Islands. They basically are part of us here in the Americas, legally, according to the law, right? Because that's where a lot of these ones are trying to make their case. They're trying to make their case for reparations with the They go into United States Census and the United States this and the United States that. That shows you a tethering, right? They're not seeking, many of them have even cut off Africa. And they found this hypocrite that made all this money and did all this stuff to tell you about hidden colors, right? Was it already a colorism agenda from the very beginning? It's something that we need to ask, right? There's no American history without black history, really. There's no American history without black history. That's interesting. You know, depends on how we read that right there. There's no American history without black history. Well, I'm inclined to agree with that one. That one is different than the other ones, right? Happy Black History Month. But it still, right, has a kind of covert, it has a covert tethering in it, don't you think? Like this one. Look at this one here. Look at this one here. This one says black history is American history. It is American history? Wow. You know? Wow. Black History Month 2026, February 1st to March 1st. Beware, brothers and sisters, this is another video we're going to seek to do. Beware of the left-hand fist. Beware, remember where you heard it, Chaverin. Beware of the left-hand fist. They said, why beware of the left-hand fist? What's up with that? Oh. This shows that our people have a zeal, but it's not according to knowledge, right? It's just a left-hand fist. What's wrong with that? That is not our movement. It's that black hand fist. That black hand fist, right? That right hand, right? That right hand fist. The black fist, remember back in the 60s? People don't pay attention to the subtle things. That's what I'm trying to point out, right? People don't pay attention to the subtle things, which means they can't be good, information officers. Like we need better information officers, right? And right now everything's on the free fall, right? Here it says Black history is American history. Wow, right? That's a tethering. Don't you see? By saying Black history is American history is a tethering, because obvious that we as black people, right, that were even brought over here. Even if you talk about the Abos and the black people already over here, let's just go with you on that, right? They had a history before the white man came over here with this America thing. You understand what I'm trying to say to you. You understand what's being said right here, right? Right? Black history is. So you see how all of this is trying to enforce a particular rhetoric, right? That's a part of how like spellcraft is done. They keep repeating it. You keep repeating it. Keep doing it. Now notice, here we have the colors. Before it was green on top, now it's red on top. You understand what's going on here, right? You know, remember we're in the AI, right? We're in the AI dominion nowadays. You know what I mean? We're in the sovereignty of AI. So it's very like Intel, right? You know, artificial intelligence, right? People talking about a lot of information, but when they're looking at this info, right, they don't try to make intel out of it. You know what I mean? We gather all the information, and then from information, just information, right? Doesn't make it true, right? But next thing we have to do is go over the intel so we can see what areas of it is true and useful and what areas we might need to discard, right? Yes, my brothers and sisters.
Lion of Judah Society.